What is economic development?
Well, I jokingly say I'm the glorified cheerleader for the county. And when I meet with industry representatives, basically I'm there to promote and sell. And the first and foremost is really to create jobs for our citizens. Obviously, there's two things. There's investment, which we've been very blessed with and fortunate with. And if you look at our tax rate over the past 3 or 4 years, we've been able to traditionally reduce our tax rate. And that's because of the growth of our industrial sector. So creating an industrial base that pays for itself and then also, is able to provide services for our citizens. And then the second thing is job creation. Unfortunately, right now, Jonathan, as you know, our labor shed in Johnston County is about 120,000 employees here in the county. Yet about 70% of them, almost 70%, leave every day to work somewhere else.
Welcome to another episode of Best of Johnston County, brought to you by Breeden Law Office. Our host, Jonathan Breeden, an experienced family lawyer with a deep connection to the community, is ready to take you on a journey through the area that he has called home for over 20 years. Whether it's a deep dive into the love locals have for the county or unraveling the complexities of family law, Best of Johnston County presents an authentic slice of this unique community.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Best of Johnston County Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Breeden, and today we have as our guest, Chris Johnson, the Johnston County Economic Development Director and also owner of Jules Former Well in downtown Smithfield. And that's a store he's owned for a long time. So we'll talk a little bit about economic development in the county and what he does. We'll talk a little bit about his formal wear store. And of course, we're going to talk about why he loves Johnston County as much as I do. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
No problem. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, where you grew up.
Sure thing. I grew up in the northeastern part of the state, a very rural area of North Carolina. Met my wife at East Carolina. The joke is I took her back home to meet my folks. She said, "Sweetheart, I love you, but if we're getting married, we're not going to live in Jackson." So she's third or fourth generation Johnstonian from Smithfield. And so it was just kind of a natural thing. But I've got my mother's family's from the Fuquay-Varina area. So I'm familiar with the Triangle region in Raleigh. So right out of college, I worked for the state for about 5 or 6 years. So I lived in Smithfield. It was just a natural thing. So this is where I am. So that was all in 1990. I've lived here longer than I've lived anywhere in my life. I've never lived any further than 5 miles west of I-95. So Eastern North Carolina is pretty much in my DNA.
That's awesome. We were joking right before we started recording. I know you're a huge East Carolina supporter. You've been on the Board of Visitors there for a long time, me being the NC State fan. So we always joke with each other about NC State and East Carolina. What's your wife's maiden name?
She was a Gower. And so having kind of the Gower farm is all around the Wilson Mills area. So that's the general area of not where she grew up. She grew up in Smithfield, but as far as the family, her grandfather and such.
All right. So why did you and her decide to get into the formal wear business for a long time? I think it was Jules Bridal Wear.
Exactly. Well, it's one of those things that we were fortunate to buy an existing building. She had a relative that owned a formal wear shop or a women's shop. And her mother and myself and my father-in-law, we all got together and bought the business. And over time, was fortunate enough to buy a piece of property in downtown and expand our facility there, and as well as buy a piece of property next to it. And so right now we've got, our store is about 7,000 square feet of retail space, and we've been very blessed. Our trade area is within 100 miles of our store. So we go all the way up into the Virginia area down to Florence, South Carolina, past Durham, and everything east. So we feel very fortunate that we've built up a good business.
So what all do y'all sell there? I know it's not bridal anymore. You just told me that.
Yeah, we started out in the wedding industry and did mother of the brides and bridesmaids and wedding gowns. And the business just changed a lot. David's Bridal, a lot of stuff came into the market and then we lost a sales associate that was really focused on that. And so when she left and retired, we just transitioned into more of the prom and the special events and the things that, what I said, if there's a sequin, we'll sell it type thing. But about 10 or 12 years ago, we were very fortunate that a girl from Garner here, Harley Honeycutt, came in and bought a dress off the rack and won Miss North Carolina. And so from that point, it just was like catching lightning in a bottle. And so it expanded our reach into the pageant area. Okay. Now, we don't do the honeyboo type dresses, but, the Miss North Carolina the teens, particularly the teens, because that's more of our niche market.
Oh, that's cool. And the Cleveland community just had Hanley House
Yes.
win Miss Teen America,
Yes.
which is exciting.
Yeah.
That's awesome for Johnston County and the Cleveland community. And she's a student at Cleveland High School.
Talented young lady and her family, and goes to our church at First Baptist Church. And so, yeah, very excited about that.
So you do the proms and some of the pageant stuff. Mm-hmm. Any other core customer for y'all?
We do tuxedo rentals, and that's where my niche is, particularly because we're in the busiest time of the season from January through about May. So all the tuxedo rentals and stuff, I'm usually there measuring the guys, making sure they fit. Homecoming, we do some what they call second weddings or destination weddings, but not the full-blown what you would traditionally see as a wedding gown. So it's more the informal second weddings or destination stuff. So people going to Aruba or Jamaica getting married like that. So,
have you gotten into the online sale? Can people go to your website, order a dress, and ship it to them?
My daughter has she's graduated from East Carolina, and she now is she's obviously a sales associate and responsible for our social media. So she handles all of our TikTok, all of those things that the younger generation's involved in. I'm not that tech savvy other than, Facebook and LinkedIn and things, but TikTok and Snapchat and whatever other else is out there. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Instagram. I know. So she's constantly posting videos and stuff like that. And our sales, we've seen an increase in sales because of that.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah. Well, good. And we'll talk about your full-time job or the full-time job that you're technically have. I know that when you're in retail and you own a retail store, that's its own full-time job.
It is. I jokingly say that, for the longest time, when you come home after leaving my work and meeting my wife at the house, the first thing you say is not necessarily, "Hey, sweetheart, I love you. How was your day?" It's like, how do we do at the store?
How do we do at the store? Right. Exactly. No, that's it.
Because it's like, if you don't make $1 a day, then you don't need to be in business. So it's like,
no.
How do we do?
No, look, I'm a small business owner as well. And I ask my staff that every day. I'm always looking at the credit card processing website, like, how much money came in, because it takes a lot of money to stay in business. So anyway, I guess when I first meet you, you're the Johnston County Economic Development Director, but my first meetings with you, where we started working together, you were the Downtown Development Director for Smithfield. How did you get that job?
Well, it was a kind of a journeyman's path, meaning that I'd worked, I was involved in politics. I was the county chairman for the Republican Party during the mid-90s, back when I say politics was fun. And we had the Republican wave occur and such, and I was involved in that. I worked for a U.S. congressman at the time. Unfortunately, was not reelected as one of those things. That it was a job that I absolutely loved. I did the more constituent service side, so I wasn't on the political, even though I was political, I wasn't on the political side. So helping constituents and kind of representing the congressman there, and that was David Funderburk. And so when he did not get reelected, I was kind of fell back on the path of the store, so I was kind of, and during that same time, our executive director for the Downtown Development Corporation took another position in Charlotte. And the board at that time asked me, said, "Well, Chris, can you do this as an interim until we figure out what we want to do or who we want to hire?" I said, "Sure thing." And it was almost like 2 months before the Yam Festival. So I got us through that, and I really kind of fell in love with it, and I stayed there for 15 years. So I've got small business in my DNA. And then too, I felt like, the other businesses respected me because I was one of them.
Right.
I watched their tax dollars so I was very stingy with the dollar, because I realized that I'm spending my tax dollars just as much as I'm spending anybody else's. And I never really promoted our store in the sense that I knew that if the Hall Theater or if any of the other businesses or restaurants were doing well, then I was going to be doing well at my store, and vice versa. So I did that for 15 years. I was fortunate to be appointed to the County Economic Development Advisory Board, which you had served on before. And so I got a taste of that. And then that exposed me to the regional aspect with the RTRP. And a little over 10 years ago, Rick Hester approached me. Their director had retired. I had an interim director there that was part-time. The county was growing. Things needed to be addressed. And Rick approached me about the possibility of applying for the position, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so there was a learning curve, but it really wasn't a learning curve because I knew the county. I'd lived here, everybody, and I kind of knew all the players in the communities. And plus, representing Smithfield, I kind of knew what the communities were looking for. And so I've tried to do that and bring that to the table.
Right. I just remember you jumped into the Neuse River when it did not rain on the Ham and Yam Festival.
There's always a running joke that it always rains during the Ham and Yam Festival. And I guess that's the promotional side of me, just trying to bring attention to the organization. And also the event is that, one year I built this huge rain gauge, which was like this big metal wash tub that I had sticking up in the air about 15 feet high. And it was always kind of a, embrace the struggle, so to speak. And so everybody says it always rains. And so it was one of those things that I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to jump in the river if it doesn't rain. Well, people actually thought I was going to actually jump off the bridge into the river. I said, no, I'll just jump into the water. So I had the Smithfield Fire and Rescue Department take me out in the middle of the river. And there was a couple of thousand people sitting on the bank watching me do a cannonball. And so there's video evidence or photography evidence of me doing that. So if you can't laugh at yourself and have fun with what you do, then you don't need to be doing it. So.
No, and for those listeners that don't know, the Ham and Yam Festival is the first weekend in May.
It is.
Every year. If they still have it, it is a huge event. It's 2 days, over 100 vendors, and they usually have a pretty good band on Saturday night. Now they've built a brand new amphitheater stage down there. And so that'll be coming up here the first weekend in May. And if you've not had a chance to go to the Ham and Yam Festival, I would encourage all of y'all to go. It's fun. It is family friendly. There's tons of stuff for the kids. There's great vendors. There's tremendous food. And they do a tremendous job there in Smithfield with the Ham and Yam Festival. And I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we've had some tremendous artists come through. I mean, when you think about Molly Hatchet, we had Night Ranger, we had Eddie Money one year. So when I was there, I just wanted to hear the music that I grew up with, and so was fortunate that we had great sponsorships to do that. Again, when you think about whether it's the Harvest Festival or the Clayton used to have the Strawberry Festival or the Ham and Yam Festival or Mule Days, it's really an opportunity for, it couldn't happen without the small business support. And I challenge anybody that whenever they go to these events to really seek out who has been a Trump sponsor year in and year out, because it typically is not the national chains that are sponsoring this. It's the Breeden law firms, or it's the Jewels, or it's the small mom and pop stores that really kind of put it together. And that's the ones that traditionally give back time and time again. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I've enjoyed it. There's Railroad Days in October in Selma, Mule Days the third weekend in September in Benson. The Clayton Harvest Festival, I think now has moved to the first weekend in November in downtown Clayton. You still have the Ham and Yam Festival the first weekend in May. And I don't know when the Four Oaks Acorn Festival is off the top of my head, but there are tons of festivals. Unfortunately, the Cleveland Strawberry Festival sort of went by the wayside when the Cleveland Chamber was merged into the Triangle East Chamber. So we don't have that anymore, but the festivals I really enjoy, and that's one of the things I love about Johnston County. So now, after we've talked about all this, we'll talk about actual economic development, which is your actual job for the county. What is economic development?
Well, I jokingly say I'm the glorified cheerleader for the county. And when I meet with industry representatives, basically I'm there to promote and sell. And the first and foremost is really to create jobs for our citizens. Obviously, there's two things. There's there's investment, which we've been very blessed with and fortunate with. And if you look at our tax rate over the past 3 or 4 years, we've been able to traditionally reduce our tax rate. And that's because of the growth of our industrial sector. So creating an industrial base that pays for itself, and then also, is able to provide services for our citizens. And then the second thing is job creation. Unfortunately, right now, Jonathan, as you know, our labor shed in Johnston County is about 120,000 employees here in the county. Yet about 70% of them, almost 70%, leave every day to work somewhere else. So my role, and I say this jokingly but being serious, is to turn those cars around. And because it goes back to the Main Street concept of live, work, play. The same thing can apply for my office. And that's where I've brought my philosophy is on the small business thing. And when I meet with clients and talk about the ability to provide services, we have a green tape, not red tape philosophy. is that, whether you're a small business with $500,000 in sales or a large corporation with $500 million in annual sales, it's all about, cutting on the lights, making sure that your employees get paid, making sure that you're turning a profit, making sure, receipts, invoices, shipping, receiving, it's all the thing. Obviously, the economy of scale is a whole lot bigger, but it's the same day. I mean, we all still have 24 hours a day, and it's really kind of applying that small business principle and then explaining that to prospective clients and then say, hey, we're here to help. And it's a shared risk, shared reward philosophy that we've got. So I think we check all the boxes for any project that's looking at North Carolina. I'm able to see and receive inquiries. Now, whether or not we can submit for those is another thing. And that's kind of where, having a great advisory board of making sure that we have good sites around the community, good buildings that we can promote and talk about. But at the end of the day, a lot of times we just don't have what that client needs, whether it's 3 million gallons of water and sewer capacity, which is obviously a pressure point for Johnston County, or if they need 100 megawatts of power, or they need 1,000 acres of land. And there's some things that just naturally we don't check those boxes, but because of our close proximity to Raleigh, the Research Triangle Park, the RDU Airport, the 3 major universities, all those selling things, we are within that ring that they're looking for, whether they're an international company or what. So we get to see all of those, but a lot of times we don't necessarily meet the criteria that they're looking for.
Right, but you've had a tremendous success over the last 10 years. I mean, we've had more industry come here in the last 10 years than maybe in the previous 100 years in Johnston County. And that's not by accident. And I think you deserve a lot of credit for that. I think the commissioners and the county manager would say that.
Have family law questions? Need guidance to navigate legal challenges? The compassionate team at Breeden Law Office is here to help. Visit us at www.breedenfirm.com for practical advice, resources, or to book a consultation. Remember, when life gets messy, you don't have to face it alone.
What is the number one thing when you're out there pitching Johnston County with these corporations and we're competing? And I was on the Economic Advisory Board with you for 2 years. So I kind of already know the answer to this, but I'm going to answer.
Yeah.
What is the number one thing you lead with when you're competing with South Carolina, Kentucky? We seem to always be competing with Hickory and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
What is the thing you go to first when you want to talk about Johnston County?
Well, first of all, listening to them to what their needs are. Not trying to say, I've got all your answers, listen to me. It's really sitting down, hearing what the typical industrial need is. And everything's different, but the number one factor that a lot of people are looking for is talent. I mean, it's labor. And when you're at 3.5% unemployment, which we've been very fortunate with over the past several years to be at that level, the first question they come out to ask is, where am I going to get my labor? And I go back to what we talked about earlier about our labor shed. I said, they're here. They're just leaving every day to go somewhere else. I said, the key thing is that our county average is around $45,000, from a salary standpoint. I said, if you're at that level or above, you can attract good labor. And because they would much rather live in Benson and work in Four Oaks, or live in Smithfield and work in Clayton, or wherever that is, as opposed to getting into their car and driving over to, Raleigh or Durham or wherever those jobs may be. And so again, that's when you talk about quality of life, which we have, and just labor. So that's what I lead out with. And then speed to market is the other thing. How quickly can they make the decision and be open and operational? And so we're very aware of making sure. So and you've been involved in this as far as the certification of sites and things of that nature, of making sure that we go ahead and address all the potential questions that they may have about a site. Where's the wetlands? What's the soil conditions? Has it been already rezoned? What's the price of the land? And so my office, through the advisory board, goes through and we identify sites. We work with the property owner and we get agreed upon sale price. We go through the process of having it rezoned. We do all the due diligence. So then that way they come in and say, we have already done the homework for you, and here's a great location for you to choose from. and settle. And here's how you can position your building. And here's what you can do. And here, oh, by the way, here's the price. Because the last thing a company wants to do is say, well, this is a great area, and then spend 9 months trying to figure all that out to then come to find out that, oh, there's a blue line stream that runs through the middle of a piece of property and we can't make it work. So they've wasted months and months of their due diligence. So we try to address all those things and add value to our property owners, because we've got a great group of citizens across Johnston County that have property that are working with us. And fortunately for us, we don't have to put up any money other than the cost of doing the due diligence. So we've got agreements to sell, and it's kind of a win. And so I try to lead into, like, I try to treat our citizens as I would want to be treated as a property owner, and be respectful for them, because that's just been our philosophy and it comes down from the county to the top. There's a lot of counties across the state, as you're well aware of, that have their own industrial parks that are building buildings. But from a philosophical standpoint that I believe in but the county commissioners really believe in it, is that government should not compete against the private sector. But how can we partner with that? And so it's not competing, but partnering to get us to the next level. Because obviously we've missed out on a tremendous amount of opportunity because we may not have something.
Right. Well, one of the things that we worked on during the 2 years I was on the board with you, from 2020 to 2022, was helping get private industry to build spec buildings that we could then recruit to. And the county would agree to say, if you don't have a tenant when it is finished, the county would pay the lease rate for 2 or 3 years while the county still tried to recruit a business to the building. And the first one that we did was the building at, is it Eastgate in Selma?
Eastfield, yeah.
Eastfield, yeah. Right across from the new North State Food Hall, I-95 at exit 97. And we agreed with the developers of Eastfield that if they did not have a tenant, if they would build this 100,000 square foot building, that the county would pay the lease rate until a tenant got there. And we all hoped that we wouldn't have to do that.
Right.
And we all almost knew certainly that the county was not actually going to have to pay that lease.
Right.
And before the building was finished, Be Good Foods had agreed to lease it.
Right.
The county didn't have to spend any money. But if the county had not said, we will pay that lease payment for a couple of years if you don't have a tenant, I don't know that the financing of that deal doesn't come through, that building doesn't get built, and we don't have the tenant that we have.
Right. Well, and again, they may be going somewhere else that there is already an existing shell. And to your point, what we do, we pay. It's actually it's $3 per foot up to 100,000 square feet, and it's for 2 years, which is well below a traditional lease rate for a Class A industrial space. Class A industrial space is anywhere between $7 and $9 a foot. We're paying $3 a foot, which is below, but it gives the developer a level of comfort to know that, hey, at least I know that I'm not going to get blistered, because everything can change on a dime. And the thing is that we're getting an asset. The county's getting an asset. So as soon as that lease, and the key thing is that it does not start until the building's finished. So it kind of puts the pressure on the office and on the county to get out there and really market these things and kind of make sure that we get a tenant in there, so that we can never do that. So then we can move to the next one. So it's really modeled after a program that I saw in Main Street, and we've just applied it to the industrial standpoint. It's been done in Lee County.
Lee County's had tremendous success with it.
Oh, yeah.
They really have.
Yeah, so it's one of those things, and that it's again, that public-private partnership as opposed to the county, because you're talking to now 100,000 square foot spec building is going to cost anywhere between $12 and $15 million. With a debt service on that is tremendous. And the county doesn't need, particularly with the other needs that we've addressed and talked about of what's around the county, we don't need to be in the building business. Right. But we can lease something with the hopes that we got it. And then there's always an end. There's an end after 2 years, but the tax base is always going to be there to replenish those funds eventually.
Right. And unfortunately, I'm not on that board anymore, but are there any more buildings like that going up in the county where the county has agreed to help with the lease payment if we can't find a tenant while it's being built?
One is, and it's getting ready to be completed, is over in Smithfield. There's a 260,000 square foot building. They overbuilt. We're only on the hook, so to speak, for the first 100,000 square feet as far as the price, because that was our threshold. But they went ahead and saw value in the program and built a 265,000 square foot building that came in around $25 million. So the $25 million tax base, and the $3 a foot, to put for the citizens listening in, the $3 a foot for 100,000, that's the equivalent of about $25,000 a month. Right. The tax base on it alone is probably well over $250,000, $300,000 a year anyway. So right. It's kind of a wash. But the thing is that we've just missed out on so many projects of like, I'm sorry, we've got developers willing to build you something, right, but we don't have a building. And again, speed to market is so critical in this day and age. So.
Right. Well, I tell you what, I could talk to Chris Johnston, as I almost all of these guests, all night. Yeah. But I do want you to explain, because I gave you complete grief about those economic incentives to recruit. And I think that's why the commissioners put me on that on your board, because they got tired of me complaining about it because I didn't understand it. And when I got in there and I had to look at the proposals, and I knew we were competing with these other states and these other counties for some projects, including the Amazon project that is now done there in Smithfield on Highway 70. I now understand it. I still like it, but I understand the game. So can you explain the economic development grants or sort of these give backs that the commissioners do for these buildings?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought this up, because obviously I've enjoyed our banter off the record and I mean off camera and everything. First of all, I want to make sure that the public understands that any incentives that the county gives, there are several things. First of all, there's protection on behalf of the county. The other thing is that the grant that is given to the company is actually their money being given back to them. So the point is that tax abatement is illegal. So recruiting an industry saying, well, our tax rate is at 67 cents or 69 cents, I can't remember, I apologize.
It's 69
cents.
I think it is.
Instead of saying, well, we'll cut your tax rate for the first 5 years down to 40 cents, and you just pay 40 cents as opposed to that's illegal. So, but the way that we can address that is that you pay your taxes, and then we'll give you a percentage back after you meet all the criteria. So basically, for every dollar that you give me in new tax dollars, I'll give you a percentage back over a predetermined amount of time. But you've got to make sure that the investment is there, that the jobs created are that you've said that you're going to do. So the point is that before we give back any grant, they have to do what they've said they've done. They have to pay their taxes, they have to have made the investment, and then they have to create the jobs. So there's protection on behalf of the citizens. And then two, it's not taking money out of grandma's pocket to give to some large corporation. Now, in the perfect world, I think everybody agrees that incentives are something that it's one of those things, it's the way the rules are played and the game is played today. And if you want to be competitive, you have to talk about stuff like that. But when you think about some of our larger industries, our pharmaceuticals that we've talked about, and I remember when Novo announced, and they were at that time, it was like a $1.5 billion project back in 2015, 16. I said the money that after we give back to the client, the money that the county receives is the equivalent of a $600 million project with 500 jobs. So what would a community do to receive a company at $600 million with 500 jobs? And that's no incentives at all. And so that's what you've got to, and that's what we work to prove, not to prove, but just to explain to the general public, is that the monies that the county gets to keep is astronomical in itself.
Well, and the part that I didn't get, and it was when I went to the first meeting and I was sort of grousing about them and I didn't understand it, somebody there looked at me, and it may have been the chairman, and he said, but Jonathan, we get the building for 100 years and we're only giving the taxes back for 5. And I thought, oh yeah, we do get, the building doesn't go away. It's a 100-year building.
Yeah, they're not going to pick up a $1.5 billion facility and move it over the facilities there. But again, it's one of those things that every time we have a project announcement, I try to explain to the public. It's one of those things that you've got to constantly remind and let people know that it's not your tax dollars. It's just they're just getting back their own money for a predetermined amount of time.
Right. Well, last question here, because literally we could go all night. What do you love most about Johnston County, and what has you excited about the future for Johnston County?
Well, obviously, what excites me about Johnston County, but it also is concerning, is our growth. Right now, we're probably pushing 250,000 in population. We're adding about 12 to 15,000 residents a day, which is exciting, and also meeting the needs of our existing industries, or being a part of a larger region in the Triangle region. And so that's exciting, and providing and having all the things that people want and expect in a large area. But the other thing is that we need to make sure that, and our county commissioners understand that, of trying to direct that growth, trying to maintain that sense of community, that rural character that has made Johnston County so attractive. And it's a delicate balance of government, of telling private citizens what they can and can't do. Obviously, we don't mind it if it benefits us, but don't have government tell me what to do.
Right.
But I want to make sure that the property owner next to me doesn't do such and such. And unfortunately, it's just a delicate balance. But I think Johnston County we've got a lot of things that we should be very thankful for. Good leadership, great schools, a great area to grow up and raise a family. And so it's just we are a part of Raleigh, in the Triangle region, and that's the great thing about it.
Well, that's awesome. Well, we'd like to thank, if anybody wants to get up with your office, I know you're at the airport. How would they get up with you?
Well, the best way to do this is go to our website at growwithjoco.com, and there's links there that you can connect with me, to email me or call the office.
Right. And
try to be very responsive. And then also you can follow me on LinkedIn and the social media, the Twitter and Facebook. And
right. And what's the website for the
Jules Formals?
Well,
it's funny. I'm ashamed to say it's probably just julesformals.com, but you can Google that.
All right, cool.
And again, cool. I am a novice when it comes to all these other stuff, because every time I finally figure out something, everybody's moved on to something else.
I got you. Well, anyway, we'd like to thank Chris Johnston for coming in today. If this is your first time listening to the Best of Johnston County podcast, we ask you to like, follow, or subscribe to this podcast wherever you're seeing it or listening to it, whether it be YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else, Facebook, where we have this podcast all over the place, so that you don't miss another episode of the Best of Johnston County Podcast. Podcasts are posted every Monday. And if you would also do us the favor of leaving us a 5-star review down at the bottom, wherever you see this podcast, it helps with our visibility to be shown to other people in the community, so that they will learn more about what is so great about Johnston County and hear more of the Best of the Johnston County Podcast and all of the great guests we have. Until next time, I'm your host, Jonathan Breeden.
That's the end of today's episode of Best of Johnston County, a show brought to you by the trusted team at Breeden Law Office. We thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to sharing more interesting facets of this community next week. Every story, every viewpoint adds another thread to the rich tapestry of Johnston County. If the legal aspects highlighted raise some questions, help is just around the corner at www.breedenfirm.com.